Joining us now with some tips is Dr. Harold Koplowitz. He's a psychiatrist and president of the Child Mind Institute. Doctor, thanks so much for being with us right now. I guess the basic question is, how do you approach this? And it seems to me the first answer is you have to approach it. You have to have these discussions.
I think you got it. Don't avoid this topic, and parents tend to avoid difficult topics. And I think we should put a proviso here that this discussion is different for families of color versus white families, but it's something that's essential. And I think you have to start with checking in with your child and get an understanding of what they've seen and what they think is going on. But certainly, we have to calm them down. We have to do this in a calm way, and yet make this discussion an important discussion that keeps on going.
Yeah, I mean, you point out black families have been having these conversations forever. Black mothers have been having to tell their black sons how to be careful and what to do if they're ever pulled over in a way that white mothers never have to tell their sons. And white people have been probably woefully late to this conversation, but now we're all attempting it. And so I hear you that we need to start the conversation, but a lot of people don't know what to say. I mean, where do you start? What do you tell your kids?
Well, I think you have to start with their understanding. What are they seeing on television? What have they heard? I think you have to be calm with them and explain to them that what is going on is wrong. I think it's very clear, no matter how young a child is, that you have to say that racial violence is bad. That the fact that a white policeman murdered a black man is a bad thing. I think also most kids understand bad versus good, and that the policemen sometimes, who are supposed to protect us, do things that are not correct, and then they get punished. That's why these people are arrested. I think that what's really upsetting most children, though, is the sense, these large protests, and then also the small group of people who are looting. And again, you have to explain to your children that this country really is based on the fact that we have freedom of speech, that when people gather, that people are really angry, and people are coming out and talking and saying that they want change, and that they're willing to stay up for many hours and walk on the street, that our government listens to them. That's how change occurs, and that it's upsetting, and we don't want anyone to get hurt. We particularly have to remember there's a coronavirus, and that we want people to wear masks. And that's how you have to start that conversation. But I think the conversation for white families also has to continue. So they have to make sure that they are talking about racial diversity. They have to make sure that they buy dolls that are black. They have to buy books that have predominantly black characters in them. This isn't magic. This is something that they have to work on. The difficult part is that these discussions might ask parents questions that they can't answer, and it's okay to say I can't answer it, or that it's making me so uncomfortable. Particularly, it can be very traumatic for a black man or a black mother to listen or to see things or to hear their child is upset, and to be able to say, this really upsets me. It's always best to have discussions when we're calm and centered, but this is a conversation that's going to happen with every American family. This has been more than a week of America being very, very upset. And if you look at the crowds who are protesting, this is not just black families. These are white families. These are families of all different colors. And so it becomes the starting point, I think, for discussion. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time we've had this. I was checking how many times I've had this discussion with parents about having to talk about race and violence, and that it's not the talk. It's not the one talk. This is a dialogue. If you start with your children where they are developmentally, clearly a different discussion for very young children. Sometimes you might need art or toys and dolls to describe it. And for older kids, particularly teenagers, I think it's really important that this be an open conversation, so that if they don't get it completely or you haven't hit all your points, that you make clear that you're open to keep this discussion going.
Look, I think life is questions from kids that parents can't answer. And I think that when you talk about race, it can be questions that are uncomfortable to answer. And that's okay. So what about the question, what can I do? If your child asks you, what can I do? What do you say?
Well, I think that, again, two different kinds of conversations. I think for most white families, they can really make sure they're educated about the history of racism. I think they should make sure their children understand how this country started by bringing people of color over and not treating them equally, making them slaves. I think that's really essential. I think that it's necessary to make sure that your children understand racial diversity and racial violence and the history. But then I think it's really important that while not every family is ready to go out and to protest, there is the importance of writing to, remember there's a constitution. Remember we have elected government officials. And the fact that we tell our children that I am upset by this and I'm going to write to my congressman, I'm going to write to my mayor about the way the behave. And I think that empower your children to know they can do something and that you as an adult will do something.
Dr. Harold Cross.